There are two things to take into consideration in terms of reactivity. The first one, it's easier to become non-involved or preemptively non-involved by being subject to whatever triggers you, and then you get to the point where you search inside of your body where that trigger is and what sort of emotions are behind it. Then you start to look at those particular emotions. It's quite a deep thing, and I think I've discussed it quite a few times, but I guess it's best to repeat it over and over so that comprehension can be brought into this area. But when you first start to clear yourself, you become you I guess it's in a lot of cases it's good to become reclusive to the point where you don't have a lot of contact with people, and you can do this in a householder's perspective in terms of just doing exactly what needs to be done without any overflow into areas of your life that you want to disrupt because you don't want to do it anymore. So that's probably the first step. And by cutting off what's disruptive in terms of doing things which may be detrimental towards the body, to going to an area where you're building the strength and the vitality of the body and the coherence of intelligence, you withdraw from the things which you see are drawing you down, and then you watch how the relationship between you and those that you've cut off, to the point that you find that they may gravitate back into your life to try and bring you back into the fold. And by doing that, there's usually many mechanisms or many tactics in terms of mechanisms to draw a friendship back because of the void that's put there through familiarity, the repetition of that. And a lot of people won't let you go for a while to actually move away from that repetitious nature. Now, when that occurs, you're tested on the level of your own feelings to not to be reactive towards somebody who wants to bring you back into a habitual habit, like say if you stop drinking and someone, it's a good example, I suppose, just drinking, and you've got friends that you regularly have a session with where you consume alcohol, and then you decide you're not going to drink alcohol anymore, and then there are particular methods of linguistics where someone will use guilt on you indirectly, or try to shame you into a position of being not in the fold anymore. So you're outside, so then you're not normal anymore, or they'll just bring a six-pack with them and put it right in front of you to try and tempt you to go back into the same habitual behavior, because they don't want you to leave the loop. Because the loop is basically companionship, really. People define companionship through the habitual habits that they formulate between each other, so that then you can test yourself how you're going to react to that, and also the connective link between what they expect of you and how that expectation will then allow you to reference that you're not being respected in a certain way, and then you've got to look at the mechanism that you use to combat those types of feelings coming towards you. So then you could, from that perspective, it's kind of reversed, because you'll be reacting upon somebody's input towards you in terms of your justification about what they do to you, not to free you from your circumstances. So there's your first reaction, to blame somebody else. And then it'll get to the point where if you're smart enough, you'll actually see that you're reacting towards somebody's intentions towards you, and using them as a justification to keep those feelings in motion. So then when you get past that stage, you can say we can stop blaming other people. And even if somebody does something and they're willfully doing something which is totally against your grain, then you still got to look at this as a reaction against somebody's external input to influence your life. Because once they influence your life, they kind of pierce the bubble of your sphere, and then it will leak because of your concern towards that person, or they will do that to make you leak, so your power of conviction will be lost. Either one of the two. So you look at that and you can say, well, the not doing the other person is basically one of the things that we've really got to practice. But not doing somebody else there are portions of your original feelings in those not doings which are a test for you to identify that your being is affected, and being knowing. So your being is affected. You know how you're being affected. You formulate why you're being affected that way, and then you decide not to do it. So there's a huge amount of information in the knowing area to perceive the withdrawal of your doings to become a not doing. So you still got portions of doings inside of that, even though you will say to yourself that you're doing something spiritual to withdraw, but in actuality, your empty being has become aware of something, and the bulk of information isn't a not doing. It's defined by the doing that you become. You get into the area, okay, I need to not do this. So you can really say that you've still got a big block of information that you're still sorting out inside of yourself. And in this case, being knowing and not doing can become self-damaging, because the person will say, well, I'm spiritually progressing, but they're formulating a bigger chunk of themselves they're in denial of, and then putting the not doing and saying, I'm not doing you, and then justifying their behavior behind it. So there's still a block of information in terms of emotional reactivity. So then you take it another step where you're being, and you know exactly what you're looking at, and you're not going to react to it because you're so used to it and it's boring, and it's like, I can't do this anymore because it's just a waste of time and everything like that. So you've still got a block of information in there saying, okay, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to react to it. You're not reacting to it, but you've still got justification behind it. So it's not emotional, but it's still a formulation of, I've left that and I don't really like that, and I can see it coming towards me, so I'm not going to do it. So you've still got an area of frequency, or a familiar frequency inside of yourself. You're still sort of fiddling around with and trying to reverse engineer on yourself, but you're actually trying to reverse engineer the other person to try and save your face. It's very Oriental, actually. When you look at this, you try and save face, and you put it on the other person, and it's quite Western as well. So not to put it all on the Orient, because their tactic is basically not to say anything, so they don't have the problem about having to fix what they spoke about. So they do it indirectly. But and a lot of Westerners are like that now too, because they've become very, very sly in their behavior. And I'm not saying Asians are sly in their behavior. I mean, everybody's evolving in a certain degree to work on the gross elements and make it look subtle when the gross elements haven't been dealt with. So then you look at it, you go being knowing, and then you identify what you're not going to do because you don't have a trigger to it. You don't have to justify it to yourself, and then you don't speak to anybody else about it, because the weight of it isn't bearing upon your feeling center, so you don't have to soundboard it with your close partner, but that's still doing. You're not doing by transferring it to your partner. So that's another element. So you've dealt with it, but then you give it to your partner to reassemble it in another way. So a lot of people, when they come to the office, they say, when you come here, I'm going to disassemble you. When you go out, please don't reassemble yourself by having social conversations and rebuilding yourself. And everyone goes, what? And they still go home and reassemble themselves. So it's so when you look at it from that perspective, then you've got to have the courage to say you have something inside of yourself, and you know that it's you don't need to soundboard it, and you just you realize that what's occurring inside of you, go home to your partner, and you just give your partner love and affection, and then you use the impetus of what was uncomfortable, then turn it into love, and then turn it into something constructive through using that energy and pouring positivity in, and then using the frequency of positivity, or this frame, or level of gratitude for your partner, and compassion. These are the transformative powers, and then the localized feeling, which is very, very small, doesn't get amplified into your partner when she's not even there. So or your partner, if he's not there. So when you look at it from this point of view, you've got to have a very, very strong fortitude in terms of not transferring any information, and trying to transfer that information with love and affection. And then you go to I'm very long-winded today, aren't I? Then you take it into another level, and you go back to the person who left something in you, which you can transfer into into a form of affection, into a form of gratitude towards your partner, then you've got to reverse engineer that and say, when somebody does something, they pop it inside of you, you've got to actually have enough conviction within yourself to actually treat them like your partner and give them gratitude and love and affection for what they've done, because you're grateful, because you know that that you're not going to accept it, but you're going to give back exactly opposite to the to what the input feels it's right to get back from you, so that it can continue the loop. Yeah. So then once you get to that particular stage, then you've got to look at every nuance of reactivity in terms of the feelings that don't have gratitude embedded with them, and then start looking at that and start disassembling that from your own personal perspective, by knowing that, and it's exactly the same principle, but I'm just flipping it in another way, is that you look at it very, very carefully. You give gratitude to that person. You give gratitude to your close quarter friends or companions that are fully in on this way of transforming normal cognition into an area of frequency which doesn't have a definable reference point, because it's a frequency, and I'll go into that in a second. So when you look at it from this perspective, then what you're really doing is that you give gratitude to them, because they're not going to transform you into somebody that is in reference to what they're doing to you. So they get a reflection of themselves through you in the alternative method that you would rebound on their input. So when you look at this is basically refusing the frequency and refusing the mind chatter, and not allowing the mind to go into loops inside itself, which is virtually like talking to your partner, or like talking to your best friend, because you'll practice inside of your head what you're going to say to yourself, and this is going to be reinforced through repetition, and then finally the emotions will come about inside of you and say, well, I've got justification to repeat what I've got in my mind because I'm looping it inside of my head. So even though that doesn't have an emotional trigger to it, it actually ends up being an emotional trigger, because the mind is very sneaky to build the recitation, which is like a mantra, because you say this inside of your head, and then you produce a certain feeling. That certain feeling then will justify the resonant field of the recitation within the feeling center, and there you go, you're caught again. I hope I'm not going too quick. Because people who meditate, if they use a mantra, what they're doing is trying to transfer negative thoughts, and those negative thoughts, when they're released from those negative thoughts, they'll have some sort of upheaval or relief. But it's only upheaval and relief of everything which has been downtrodden or pressed down by the mind itself to not allow the emotions to be free. Now, the biggest thing where I haven't really gone into is the most difficult thing to come to terms with, because leading groups of people or units of information, which are people in terms of the frequency that they transmit into the environment, is very, very important. So if you look at mind, it's a frequency. So we subdue the mind. We don't have a frequency of mind, and then we have negative responses that aren't supported by the mind, which will upheaval, and then we go through the upheaval of that, and then we have a sense of renewal, because the upheaval gives a fresh feeling, and the fresh feeling feels like we're being reborn into a circumstance and totally accepted by that circumstance, because we were allowed to upheaval by dropping one element of our communication, our ability to so-called communicate, but we're really just communicating between our own mind and our own emotions, and trying to get the trigger of connectivity with somebody else to correspond with those mind and emotion frequencies. So when you really look at this, if you look at it from the terms of vibration, is that the resonant field of memory has got to do with this. This is just our memory, and this is a small facet of memory. So when you look at it from this perspective, if you have a combination of feelings which are new for you, just say like you're doing opening the Tao last time you did, and you were moving your body in a certain way to move the fascia. The fascia itself is a web-like substance which is full of liquid. It's 75% liquid, water, and then as soon as your empty mind goes through those fascial pulls, The fascial pull doesn't have the generation of mind in it. It only has the generation of the spirit body within it, because the spirit body doesn't have a thought form. So then it progressively moves to another frequency, because you use your listening power, your E, your looking, your listening, your feeling center goes through the fascial line. The fascial line doesn't have a response in terms of thought forms. It takes you through the line, and the line then eliminates mind, eliminates emotion, and just gives a clear experience. And as you have that clear experience, you go through that particular part of your physiology, and that is a frequency. Once you're born into that frequency, you go, oh, that's very, very interesting. Then you go on to the next movement, or you move another line with a different part of your body. It's still a different frequency, because the moment we tip like this, even if I just tip like this, everything will go in the direction of where I'm tipping. So the whole body cooperates. So we're a holistic system. So when you look at movement, you've got to really see that everything we do is dependent on movement. It's dependent on mind, which moves emotion, which is just a deeper reference point of the sea, of the just say the sea of our mind has been reduced to a small river, and then it becomes a the rivers of mind are quite vast. So when you go through those fascial pulls, then you've discovered something which you never noticed before. And if you've never noticed it before, you don't have a framework of connectivity to it like you do with an emotional response towards somebody else, that you say, I'm not going to do that, or I'm going to be involved in that. And that's a frequency which is how social engineering works. A very, very intelligent loop. And it's such an intelligent loop that it can be manipulated through the media in all sorts of different fashion. Because if somebody has an opinion, and the opinion is a false opinion, and you believe in the faction or the group or the tribe which you believe in, you'll be tilted towards that direction just because of bias, because you want to be accepted. And that's a natural thing for human beings, to want to be in a group and be accepted by the group. So that's another problem, actually, is group awareness in terms of acceptance, and then having enough strength in a group to say something which is totally opposite of what they expect, and then go, bang, okay, we need to look at this, because it isn't surrounding the same parameters. It's new, it's interesting, and it's threatening, because it tips the status quo into another area of evolutionary process. This is kind of huge, really, when you look at it. So when you start to work on the frequency of the fascial pulls, then you've got to take into consideration the intelligence of the muscle, the nadis. There are so many nadis on the right hand side, left hand side, central channel, and you activate all these prospects. It's quite complex and quite overwhelming. But if you set your body in a certain format which brings peace and quietude, then you're training your body through your physical system to align with these frequencies, which only bring about stillness. And on top of the stillness, then when you become used to it, you set a framework for your body to be contained within. And that's why the internal arts are very, very good for to create more stillness through movement and meditation. Because meditation, you can believe you've got somewhere. You can even fictionalize a visualization. And that can fictionalize a feeling. So it's very, very important to do something without any preemptive motive. As you can see, preemptive motive is the same as when someone thinks and feels about someone else, they want to catch them in, and they don't want to stop drinking. So that's a preemptive motive. So they even visualize it before they bring it to you. So when you look at this, we're looking at memory in its full vast amplitude. So when you look at memory, then what are we doing with memory, and what is memory? In terms of the past doesn't really exist anymore, so why is the past brought into the present moment? And the future doesn't really exist yet, but why is the visualization of the future brought into the present moment? But within the present moment that's continually escaping us, both exist simultaneously. So the time-space continuum maybe is fractured a little bit when you look at this, and there are many layers of consciousness. So when you look at frequency, and you look at the manufacturing of frequency within your body, then when you find a new frequency, you're developing a new memory. but the memory doesn't have coherent resonance in terms of you functionally using it, because the frequency of the new resonant field doesn't correspond with the old resonant field that you've been involved in. So you don't know what you're doing in terms of what are you building in terms of the new frequency that you've discovered, or you can't really discover it until it manifests. So, but the only thing you can look at is to say, I do a yin yang gung like this, and we develop a new frequency. Then where the field of mind, or the river of your mind, will go into the invisible area in front of you, and then you set that in your body, put it through your bones, and then it gathers a momentum because it goes into areas of your body. So then you're developing universal mind, which is building your present day memory without any expectation, because you don't know what that memory is going to become, because the frequency is so refined. And you can't build a frequency that's going to be negative when you do this. You just can't do it, because you don't know what you're looking for. You have to let go of everything, so you can't be good or bad. You can just be neutral to solicit the growth and the mechanisms that are in the framework of your physical presentation. Size of the facial features, size of your bones, everything is taken in consideration. Like we're a walking feng shui, we're a walking sacred object. So when you look at this, whatever frequency you bring into your body in terms of putting both elements together, and then assigning your awareness to something which is not visually available to you, and it is only feeling, then you're developing memory there, and that memory then pulls on the formulations of people that have done the same thing for thousands of years, and they've achieved certain things, and as you tap into that, then you have to grow into the new memories, which correspond to something which has been done for thousands of years, which is in the Akashic file, or in the memory system of the resonant field of the planet, because it is there. And if it's overridden, like it is from a social engineered point, it's very, very difficult to discover where it is, because the methods are lost, and some of the methods can be dangerous, because they're going through the body in a way which you need guidance. But until those higher levels, it doesn't really matter, as long as you can go through and build a memory which doesn't have the symptoms of what you expect in exchange. Symptoms, because that is a sickness. Yeah. So you don't expect anything in exchange. You discover what's going to exchange with you, and then the momentum of that will erupt to become a form of wisdom which informs you about what you know, but you don't know what you know until it rises through your central channel, and then appears as a verbal command which has got nothing to do with what you know until you hear it yourself. And you can't attach to that, because when you can't attach to what you're saying. I've gone through this for years myself, and I'm sure you've gone through it, is that you say something and go, oh, can you repeat that? And you say, well, no, I can't repeat it, because it's a new field of exploration which is coming about via the person's input. And then when you look at this, how progressively magnificent and precious that is, because the question will bring about the evolutionary process via the fact that a new frequency comes up to surprise even the person who's transmitting it. And this is really the magic of our evolutionary process. So, how's that for an answer? And also too is there are so many things that we've got to be really, really aware of, in terms of, it's like the first thing I'll say in terms of what should people expect if they go down the area of maybe doing low band pi, doing their spiritual work. What should they expect in exchange? They can't expect anything in exchange, and that's the biggest thing. But the only real exchange is with the true gratitude you have for somebody else within your presence, even if they're negative, because they bring the best part of you out. And then it goes back to root back. If you have a feeling inside of you that's not being dealt with, and the trigger point, it's not that it hasn't been ignored; it just hasn't been recognized as a what would you say? You got a right to be triggered because the closest person to you has asked you a question or done something which you're allowed to have an emotional response with them, where you should have 10 times more discipline with your partner than you do with somebody who you're teaching. This is for everybody who's in a relationship, including me. So you look at this and you say, well, why do I have permission to get upset with the person I cherish the most? Yeah. And why don't I get upset with another individual? Because you don't have those cherished connections, and you feel like you don't have the right to do it with somebody who's inquiring, but you feel like you got the right to do that with your partner. This is the biggest trigger to say, oh shit, I'm triggered. I better look at this. And then the danger of saying that, if your partner's incoherent, they'll use that against you, and then you're done. Because once you admit that, and that's the power play between people who get close, or married couples, or everything like this, is that's the biggest trigger, is to not be put in a position that you're weakened, then attacked, because you haven't been weakened, you've been transparent, and then that battle has to be fixed first. Primary thing that has to be fixed, even if it's only fixed after 10 years of becoming a teacher. It's like you look at this and you say, oh, I'm not really consistent. And then when you do that, then you look at the trigger points and start looking and having enough distance to actually give gratitude to your partner, and not involve either one, myself or even Miss, but say like this, we won't do it, because we know the outcome of that type of behavior causes an internal turmoil, and then the planet's got you again, or the social engineering's got you again, because your household has got conflict. Yeah. And that's the biggest thing. If they can divide people in their families, they can divide couples, they can divide friends, they can divide households, they divide the whole country. So, and this is all over the world. So if we look at it from this perspective, if we want to be spiritually not impotent, we've actually got to say, we've got to look at this very, very closely, and why can't we grow through this? And that's a beautiful test. It's one of the best tests there are, because you need to everybody needs to stand firm in their own household to make sure they haven't got this conflict going on, because that conflict is what tears everything down. And you've got to have 10 times the amount of speed not to be caught in this position, and make sure that you preemptively know what's going on. The only way I can do that is to empty all the points of reference, which are your triggers, which you haven't dealt with. So then you've got to look at every single micro gesture. It's like if you pick something up and you put it down too hard like this, you know that you've got a problem. Yeah, you slam a door, you know you've got a problem. If you give a slight look, then you've got to look at your own micro gestures before you examine. Well, the old saying, take the log out of your eye, and don't focus on my splinter. Yeah.